Hey guys, Tyler here. The Star Trek Reboot film trilogy, also referred to as the Kelvin Timeline Trilogy, is, without a doubt, one of the most pivotal things to ever happen to the Star Trek franchise. Not because these movies are universally loved, but because they unequivocally introduced Star Trek to a new generation of fans, including me. The first two movies, 2009's Star Trek and 2013's Star Trek Into Darkness, were directed by J.J. Abrams, with the third, 2016's Star Trek Beyond, directed by Justin Lin, known for the Fast and the Furious franchise. Together, these three films feature a new cast as the crew of the USS Enterprise from the original series, except set in an alternate reality whose destiny is shaped by the actions of a Romulan madman from the future named Nero. While the films have been divisive among some fans, much like the even more heavily disliked Star Trek Discovery, they jump-started a new era of the franchise after the Star Trek brand had hit a low point following the cancellation of Enterprise. And despite the Kelvin movies taking place in a parallel universe, their impact on canon is still being felt today. In this video, I'd like to examine the production and reception of the Kelvin Timeline Trilogy, cataloging its lore contributions, and answering the question of whether Trek can truly work on the big screen in the first place. And, oh yeah, in case you haven't seen these films over the past 15 years, there will be spoilers in this video if that's something you care about. But before we dive in, a word from today's sponsor, Architects of Fate. Hey, are you looking to build an adventure with friends? Well, I just might have the place for you. Architects of Fate is a Twitch channel that specializes in tabletop RPGs, with an emphasis on interactive gameplay and storytelling, all for free. Just by jumping into chat, you can make the lives of the Game Master and players easier or harder. It's up to you. Not only do Architects of Fate play well-known RPGs like 5th edition D&D, but they also play less common RPGs like Star Trek, Star Wars, Conan, Aliens, Planet of the Apes, Fallout, and more. Plus totally original games like Solar Patrol, and Bad Horse's Evil League of Evil with the two-headed DM. Architects of Fate even has community game nights with chat. They're always looking for new games to share with each other and invite you to play alongside them. The goal of each stream is to make sure every viewer and player gets their chance to contribute and shine. If you like Star Trek, check out Bajor Rising on Mondays, featuring an ad hoc team of junior officers on the Galaxy-class USS Odyssey. Players embark on official and classified missions in support of Bajoran independence during the Cardassian occupation. They discover the prophets may not be mythical, and another, greater enemy may have plans for the sector. Join in to help weave tales of covert operations, moral dilemmas, and the struggle for freedom. There's also Cookie Trek, streaming every Friday. Hosts and chat collaborate as a writer's room to craft original, often hilarious Trek-inspired stories that draw from the entirety of Trek lore. This season explores the exploits of the newly christened Florida-class starbase, Starbase Tallahassee. Started in early 2019 by Chief Architect Nat Too Shabby, Architects of Fate continues his family's tradition of tabletop gaming and late-night storytelling by sharing the experience with everyone. So, come watch and join a group of players to write new stories and forge new friendships. Architects of Fate can be watched live on Twitch or rewatched on YouTube at the links in the description below. Big thanks to Architects of Fate for sponsoring this video. Now, with that out of the way, let's get started. The story of the Star Trek reboot films honestly begins before there were any Star Trek films, period. In 1968, during production on the original series, franchise creator Gene Roddenberry expressed his desire to make a prequel film to TOS. While this didn't pan out at the time, the idea did resurface in the late 1980s after the first slew of TOS movies had been released. Ralph Winter and Harve Bennett, producers on those movies, submitted a proposal for a prequel that was ultimately rejected by Roddenberry. David Lowery, writer of Star Trek V: The Final Frontier, penned a script called The Academy Years, which was also shelved in light of objections by Roddenberry and the fanbase. In 2005, after Enterprise's cancellation and the box office failure of the final film with the Next Generation cast, Star Trek Nemesis, executive producer Rick Berman and screenwriter Eric Jenderson developed a project called Star Trek: The Beginning. The film would have been set during the Earth-Romulan War, after Enterprise but before TOS, and featured an ancestor of James T. Kirk's named Tiberius Chase. However, given the franchise's financial troubles at the time, Paramount decided to let Rick Berman go and thus turned to another team to begin developing the next Star Trek film. Viacom, owner of Paramount Pictures, had split from the CBS Corporation, which retained the Star Trek television rights. Then president of Paramount, Gail Berman, no relation to Rick, convinced CBS's chief executive, Les Moonves, to allow Paramount 18 months to develop a new Star Trek film before Paramount would have lost the film rights. Berman approached Alex Kurtzman and Roberto Orci, who wrote Mission Impossible 3 and the 2007 Transformers film for Paramount, to come up with ideas for a new Star Trek movie. While Kurtzman described himself as a casual fan, Orci, who passed away in early 2025, considered himself a die-hard Trekkie, as did another producer attached to the project, Damon Lindelof, one of the showrunners of Lost. After Mission Impossible 3 completed shooting, Berman asked J.J. Abrams to produce the new Trek film. Abrams would eventually decide to direct the film after reading the script since, as he explained, he, quote, would be so agonizingly envious of whoever stepped in and directed the movie. I'd also like to interject here that it's largely a myth that J.J. Abrams isn't a Star Trek fan or hates Star Trek. While it is true that Abrams would go on to use the Reboot trilogy as a springboard to direct Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens, Abrams absolutely is a fan of the original series. He said in an interview that he had not seen Nemesis as he felt the franchise had become disconnected from TOS. For Abrams, Star Trek was about Kirk and Spock, with the other series being separate space adventures with the name Star Trek. But while he did acknowledge preferring the Star Wars movies as a kid, during the press tour for the movie, Abrams purportedly exaggerated his preference for shows besides Star Trek in an effort to promote the new film to new audiences. While finding new audiences is often used derisively as a signifier of film studios' corporate greed, the fact is Paramount felt it needed to shed a stigma that Star Trek had developed by the 2000s. In addition to the obstacle of, as they put it, the MySpace generation's relative unfamiliarity with the franchise, the weakened international performance of the films was an actual serious issue for Paramount. Abrams felt his general knowledge of TOS made him well suited to introduce newcomers to the franchise, and while he didn't quite love Kirk and Spock when he began the journey, after making the film, he did. Orci knew from the get-go that getting Leonard Nimoy in the film was deeply important, and that time travel was always going to be part of the story. Kurtzman would add that time travel creates jeopardy, unlike in other prequels where viewers know how all the characters will die. While the writers acknowledged time travel was overused, it did serve a good purpose in setting up new adventures for the original characters before the trope could be done away with in future films. Abrams also chose the Romulans as the villains, as they'd been featured less than the Klingons throughout the series, and Orci and Kurtzman felt it would be wrong to demonize the Klingons again after they become allies of the Federation in Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country. Additionally, Abrams thought it would be a fun twist to have Kirk meet the Romulans before he does in the TOS episode Balance of Terror, which served as a major influence for the script. Orci's status as a superfan of the franchise in general also influenced his decisions in the writing process in a major way, since Star Trek technically continues the storyline of Spock's last chronological appearance in the TNG episode Unification, which depicts Spock's involvement in the Vulcan-Romulan reunification movement. Orci, along with the other writers and producers, also cited the TNG episode Yesterday's Enterprise as an influence, given its heavy involvement of time travel and creation, albeit temporary, of an alternate timeline where characters have different fates from their Prime Universe counterparts. Much like how the Enterprise C crew's arrival in the future has major consequences for Tasha Yar's character, Nero's travel to the past alters the trajectories of the lives of Kirk and his contemporaries. And the planet Romulus's destruction in Nero's original time frame also serves as an acceleration of the Romulan Empire's demise following Shinzon's coup in Nemesis. Orci said that this was done to give Nero a motivation that was not too gimmicky, like having Nero specifically seek to assassinate Kirk. Although the time travel elements would allow the writers to have more flexibility with the characters' backstories, they wanted to avoid using it as a crutch and tried as much as possible to approach the film as a prequel. That said, Kirk's service on the USS Farragut, a core element of the TOS episode Obsession, was left out as it was deemed irrelevant to the primary story of Kirk meeting Spock. But the Farragut does get a verbal shout-out in a scene in the film when Cadet Uhura demands she be assigned to the Enterprise because of her unparalleled expertise in xenolinguistics.
And while you are well aware that my unqualified desire is to serve on the USS Enterprise, I'm assigned to the Farragut?
It was an attempt to avoid the appearance of favoritism.
No, I'm assigned to the Enterprise.
The filmmakers also took much inspiration from the Star Trek novels, in particular Prime Directive by Judith and Garfield Reeves-Stevens, as well as Spock's World and Best Destiny by Diane Duane, to fill in some of the gaps left unexplained by canon. While Star Trek novels are officially non-canon, Orci and Lindelof felt that some of the novels had canonical value. Another element lifted from the novels is the Enterprise being built on Earth, inspired by a piece of fan art of the Enterprise being built at a shipyard. Orci sent the fan art to Abrams to show how realistic Star Trek's setting could be. He would later comment further justifications for having the ship constructed on Earth, specifically the use of a natural gravity well to help calibrate the ship's artificial gravity systems. Because canon had been ambiguous on the matter, they felt free to have the Enterprise built in Iowa rather than somewhere like San Francisco, although this detail could be unique to the alternate reality and was not intended to overlap with the Prime universe. Especially since in the Prime universe, the Enterprise is already in service years before the film is set. Another challenge the filmmakers faced was in the realm of production design. Because much of modern technology has been inspired by TOS, the look of TOS has become outdated. Thus, the production was tasked with being faithful to TOS while also making Star Trek's world feel more advanced than the present day. Production designer Scott Chambliss kept the original layout of the Enterprise's bridge, but aesthetically altered it with bright colors to reflect Trek's optimism. The view screen was converted to a window onto which images could be projected, making the environment of space more palpable. Railings were added to make the bridge look safer, and the bridge set itself was built on gimbals so that the rocking motions of the ship accelerating and being attacked would appear more realistic. Abrams also chose to give a highly industrial appearance to the engine room, inspired by the Titanic. Abrams chose Michael Kaplan to design the costumes as he had not seen any of the other movies, meaning he would approach the costuming with a new angle. Kaplan followed the show's original color coding for the Starfleet uniforms, with dark undershirts and pants, and primary colored overshirts denoting each crew member's department. In the mid-23rd century, command officers wear gold, science and medical wear blue, and operations personnel, including technicians, engineers, and security, wear red. Kaplan also added a Starfleet symbol pattern to these shirts, a motif carried over into the production design of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. The Romulans in the film were also modeled after pirates, and Nero's ship, the Narada, was purposefully given the appearance of a working ship with visible mechanics. Chambliss took heavy inspiration from the architecture of Antoni Gaudi, who created buildings that seemed inside out. The Romulan actors had prosthetics applied to their ears and foreheads, notably lacking the V-shaped ridges present in all their depictions since TOS, and both digital and physical makeup was used for many of the other aliens. Principal photography for Star Trek took place between November 2007 and March 2008, with a second unit filming in April 2008. The film was shot in California and Utah, with the filmmakers also considering Iceland for some scenes, but deciding against it. Among the notable locations used were the California State University Northridge in LA, standing in for Starfleet Academy, Vasquez Rocks for Vulcan exteriors, a Long Beach power plant for the USS Kelvin's engine room, and, controversially, a Budweiser plant for the Enterprise's engine room. Shooting was also complicated by the 2007-2008 Writers Guild of America strike. Abrams, himself a WGA member, announced he intended to walk the picket line, but would still be able to direct the film. He just couldn't render any writing services. This led Abrams and Lindelof to polish the script for a final time in the weeks leading up to the strike and the start of production. While normally the actors would have been able to improvise new lines during rehearsal, in conjunction with WGA rules, the production would have to resort to dubbing some lines in post. Orci and Kurtzman were also able to be present on set without breaking the strike, since they were also executive producers on the film. Whenever they had a problem with one of the lines, they could, quote, make funny faces at the actors and sort of nod when they had something better. The production also maintained heavily enforced security around the film. Actors were not allowed to walk around in public in costume and had to be herded around in golf carts, completely covered in black canvas. Some actors like Jennifer Morrison, who plays Jim Kirk's mother Winona, were only given the scripts of their individual scenes, and Simon Pegg, who plays Montgomery Scott, read the script with a security guard near him. Abrams chose to shoot Star Trek on 35mm film in the anamorphic format, as opposed to shooting it on high-definition digital video. Cinematographer Dan Mindell agreed with Abrams' choice as it gave the film a more organic look, and they also felt compelled to use lens flares to simulate activity taking place off camera, making the Trek universe feel more real. Mindell created some of the flares by pointing a flashlight or mirror at the camera lens, sometimes even using two camera setups and thus two sets of lights. The flares were so significant that the editors even contacted the film developers in order to ask them why the film seemed overexposed. Just as they did for many of the previous Star Trek films, Industrial Light and Magic created many of the visual effects shots for the film, in addition to other companies like Digital Domain. Abrams actively tried to avoid shooting against blue and green screen as much as possible, using them only to extend the scale of sets and locations. The scenes where Kirk is marooned on an icy planet in the Vulcan system required mixing real and digital snow. Star Trek was also ILM's first Trek film involving entirely digital ships. The redesigned Kelvin Timeline Enterprise was intended to pay homage both to the Enterprise from TOS as well as the refitted version from Star Trek the Motion Picture. Abrams had a particular fondness for the refit, as it was the first time the Enterprise felt tangible and real to him. Enterprise was originally designed using the original dimensions, at 1,200 feet or 370 meters long, but it was doubled in scale to make it seem grander. This made the Narada 5 miles long and several miles wide. NASA scientists Carolyn Porco was also consulted on planetary science and imagery, with the animators realistically recreating how an explosion would appear in space, short blasts that suck inward and leave floating debris. For these shots of Vulcan imploding, they used the same explosion program to simulate it breaking up, and the animators could manually composite multiple layers of rocks and wind that would suck into the planet. Unlike other Trek films and shows, the transporter beam effects also swirl rather than speckle, conceived to emphasize the notion of transporters being beams that could pick up and move people rather than signals composed of scrambled atoms. The film's sound effects were designed by Ben Burtt, a veteran of the Star Wars franchise. He modeled the phasers to sound more like the blasters from Star Wars, and he reproduced the classic photon torpedo and warp sound effects by tapping a long spring against a contact microphone, then combining it with cannon fire. The transporter and warping sounds were also enhanced with a musical hum created by a 1960s oscillator. Speaking of music, Michael Giacchino, Abrams' most frequent collaborator, composed the score, keeping Alexander Courage's original theme for the end credits. The opening of the film establishes some key elements of James T. Kirk's backstory, and also gives us a glimpse into one of the franchise's lost eras, the time in between Enterprise in the mid-22nd century and TOS in the mid-23rd century. In 2233, Kirk's father, George Kirk, played by Chris Hemsworth, serves aboard the USS Kelvin, captained by Richard Robow. The Kelvin, named after Abrams' grandfather, as well as the mathematician and physicist Lord Kelvin, patrols near the Klingon neutral zone when it encounters a lightning storm in space. This is notable as a similar anomaly, an ion storm, is frequently used in Star Trek to depict an impending crossover between the Prime and Mirror universes. This time, however, out of the singularity emerges the Narada. The Narada's Romulan crew establishes visual first contact with the Federation 33 years ahead of the same event in the Prime universe, marking the first major change to the timeline. Nero, played by Eric Bana, and his crew demand the location of Ambassador Spock, who we will later see travel through the same singularity which the Narada fell into in the future, 2387 to be exact. After seeing that they've arrived too early, Nero kills Robow, and the Narada resumes firing upon the Kelvin. Kirk, having taken command, goes down with the ship while his wife gives birth to their son, James, in an evacuating shuttle. Kirk's sacrifice becomes legendary and is the subject of Christopher Pike's dissertation at Starfleet Academy. But as a consequence of George's death, unlike in the Prime universe, James grows up without a father. While his aptitude tests are off the charts, Kirk develops a rebellious streak and is described by Pike, played by Bruce Greenwood, as
the only genius-level repeat offender in the Midwest.
As a teenager, Kirk also steals his stepfather's antique Corvette and deposits it into a quarry. While on his joyride, Kirk yells at a boy he passes on the road. This was originally intended to be James's older brother, George Jr., but after his other scenes that would have added more context were deleted from the final cut, the line was overdubbed. We also see parts of Spock's early life on Vulcan, including a scene in which he is taunted for his mixed heritage by other Vulcan youth at a learning center. This kind of interaction, which has occurred at least 35 times, is mentioned by Spock's mother Amanda Grayson in the TOS episode Journey to Babel, and a similar incident is depicted in the animated series episode Yesteryear. A learning center akin to the one in the 2009 movie is also depicted in flashback episodes of Star Trek Discovery. Spock's emotional response leads his father Sarek, played by Ben Cross, to gently admonish him for his lack of control. Spock suggests his father wants him to become fully Vulcan, and yet Sarek married a human, which Sarek coldly replies was only logical as he was an ambassador to Earth. Later in the film, after Vulcan is destroyed and Amanda is killed, Sarek explains that logic was, indeed, not the only reason he married Amanda. He married her because he loved her. As an adult, Spock, played by Zachary Quinto, confides in Amanda, played by Winona Ryder, that he is conflicted about whether to undergo the Kolinar to purge all emotion. We see Spock participate in this activity early during the motion picture before he senses the arrival of V'ger in Federation space. He later stands before a committee that informs him of his acceptance to the Vulcan Science Academy, with one elder commending Spock for his accomplishments in spite of his disadvantage, his human mother. Spock then declines admission, saying that since he isn't fully Vulcan, the Academy's record of no one ever turning down admission remains untarnished. Spock's talents will now be lent instead to Starfleet. On Earth, Pike tries to recruit Kirk, played by Chris Pine, into Starfleet after Kirk is beaten up by 3 other Starfleet recruits for trying to flirt with Nyota Uhura, played by Zoe Saldana. After Pike dares Kirk to do even better than his father's heroic act, Kirk is convinced. He's joined on the recruit shuttle by Leonard McCoy, played by Carl Urban. McCoy is recently divorced and says his wife took the whole damn planet and all he's got left are his bones. After a 3-year time jump to 2258, we see another event that's been described in canon, Kirk's manipulation of the Kobayashi Maru no-win scenario to allow him to pass. Prime Kirk tells Saavik about this event in Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. An attack on Vulcan prompts Starfleet to send its cadets into action as the Federation's primary fleet is in the Laurentian system. It's during this sequence when McCoy injects Kirk with a Melvarian mud flea vaccine to allow him onto the Enterprise that the power went out at the theater where I was watching the film in 2009 because of a tornado, and we were given free tickets to come back later and see it again.
You're gonna start to lose vision in your left eye.
On the Enterprise, joining the characters in their mission at the helm are Hikaru Sulu, played by John Cho, and Pavel Chekhov, played by Anton Yelchin. The crew finds out the party responsible for the attack is none other than Nero, who along with his crew has escaped imprisonment for a quarter century by the Klingons at Rurapente, featured in Star Trek VI, as well as the Enterprise episode Judgment. The Narada, originally a mining vessel, has lowered its drill into Vulcan's atmosphere, which the Enterprise crew disables after Pike meets with Nero to negotiate. Nero has blamed Spock for the destruction of Romulus by a supernova, as Spock failed to stop the supernova in time despite political efforts by the likes of Jean-Luc Picard to attempt a Federation-aided evacuation of Romulus. Picard's involvement, along with that of Geordi LaForge in the plan to contain the supernova, is detailed in the non-canon prequel comic Star Trek Countdown. Countdown also indicates LaForge is the designer of the Jellyfish, the craft which Spock pilots in the film. On Vulcan, the Narada has drilled a hole to the core, where it deposits a sample of contained red matter, creating a black hole at the center of Vulcan. Only about 10,000 escape out of the planet's 6 billion inhabitants, meaning Spock is now a member of an endangered species. Spock is also consoled by Uhura, with whom Spock is engaged in a romantic relationship as an allusion to various early episodes of TOS where Uhura showed interest in Spock. Kirk's insistence that the Enterprise pursue the Narada towards Earth rather than falling back to the Laurentian system prompts Spock, who has been acting captain, to maroon Kirk on an icy world near Vulcan. The planet is called Delta Vega, a nod to the planet near the galactic barrier in TOS's Where No Man Has Gone Before, although Orci said the name is nothing more than an Easter egg. In any event, Vulcan canonically orbits the K-type star 40 Eridani, also known as Kaid. Delta Vega's apparent proximity to Vulcan, allowing Prime Spock to observe his own planet's destruction, was meant to be impressionistic for a general audience, rather than being taken as a literal depiction of the planet's orbital distance. Delta Vega was also originally intended to have been a desert planet similar to its television counterpart, and Kirk would have found Spock and Scotty in a sort of Mos Eisley-style environment. In fact, many of the aliens designed for the film were to have appeared at this establishment, but the scene was deemed to be too much of a ripoff of the cantina scene from Star Wars. So, script revisions made Delta Vega an ice planet, and the aliens designed for the scene were peppered throughout the film. Kirk's meeting of Spock and Scotty on Delta Vega has been noted by some as a contrivance, an accusation to which Orci and Kurtzman readily admit, but one that was deemed necessary to have the characters meet each other. Indeed, the writers originally intended to have Prime Spock make an allusion to the timeline mending itself, but the line was difficult to write and ultimately cut from the final script. Nevertheless, while Vulcan's destruction would irrevocably alter the course of Federation history in the alternate reality, and Spock insists his younger self forge his own path in life, Prime Spock takes it upon himself to ensure Kirk is put in command of the Enterprise. At a Starfleet outpost, Prime Spock shares the equation for transwarp beaming, devised by Scott's Prime counterpart, to allow the two to beam onto the Enterprise while she is at warp. Once there, Kirk is tasked with relieving Spock of command under Regulation 619 by provoking him to show he is too emotionally compromised to lead the mission. Pike had made Kirk first officer prior to boarding the Narada, meaning Kirk now commands the Federation flagship during this time of crisis. The Enterprise intercepts the Narada at Earth, severing the drill before Nero can destroy the Federation capital and ensuring the Narada's destruction via red matter. Production on the film was practically wrapped by the end of 2008, but Paramount had moved its original release from Christmas 2008 to the summer of 2009. Feeling more people would see the film then. On its opening weekend, Star Trek became the highest-grossing film in the franchise, opening with over $100 million worldwide. The foreign grosses, while representing only 31% of the film's total box office receipts, still made Paramount executives happy. The critical response upon Star Trek's release was overwhelmingly positive, with many outlets praising the acting, visual effects, and emotional story. However, others were more polarized on the film. While one of the chief criticisms levied at Star Trek has been reduced to disgruntled fans complaining about too much action and lens flares, there are some more measured critiques of the script. One of the most common complaints is that the film lacks a classic Star Trek political allegory. Writing for Empire, Colin Kennedy noted that the themes primarily relate to the nature of friendship and teamwork, which is all very well. But in a time when the United States is engaged in 2 wars, the failure to even acknowledge the issues arising from space imperialism in the Prime Directive is to flinch from battle. Harsher critics may even deem it a dereliction of duty. This is the kind of criticism that you might hear on this channel, given that I've made a video discussing the ethics of the Prime Directive, and have praised Discovery and Lower Decks for their allegorical takes on the Federation's foreign policy. But while I think this criticism of the 2009 movie is fair, I do think that the film does work on other levels. The production design of the Kelvin timeline helps make the Star Trek universe feel more industrial and lived in contrast to the rather sterile environments most of the TNG characters exist in. And as an action film, Star Trek 2009 is fun and exciting, which is something I can't say about the previous 2 films in the franchise, Insurrection and Nemesis. Star Trek 2009 isn't the first Trek film to more heavily prioritize action and spectacle over questions of science, ideals, or philosophy. philosophy, as Roger Ebert put it. Star Trek First Contact is definitely more of an action film, but I also find it the strongest of the Next Generation movies. Chris Pine has commented that the kind of slow and cerebral storytelling seen in the earlier films like Star Trek the Motion Picture is not as commercially viable for modern cinema, which is reflective of the way movie-going audiences' tastes have changed over time. This is not to say that Star Trek 2009 is a bad film, far from it. It objectively succeeded in its goal of setting up the new cast and reinvigorating Star Trek in popular culture. But what the film might have lacked in political allegory is addressed head-on in its sequels. In March 2009, Paramount signed the 5 producers of Star Trek: J.J. Abrams, Brian Burke, Damon Lindelof, Alex Kurtzman, and Roberto Orci, for a sequel. Orci and Kurtzman would once again pen the script, this time joined by Lindelof, and a draft was said to be completed by Christmas 2009 in anticipation of a 2011 release. Originally, the film would have been split into 2 parts, and Leonard Nimoy announced he would not appear in the film. Just as they had attempted for the 2009 movie, Abrams reportedly considered a role for William Shatner, but this did not pan out as the writers could not find an organic way to fit Shatner into the story. By 2010, Paramount officially set a release date of June 2012, with writing continuing throughout the year. Pre-production was set for January 2011, with Burke predicting filming would begin in the spring or summer, but Zachary Quinto would later confirm these dates were not set in stone. Abrams, Kurtzman, and Orci said selecting a villain was difficult, considering Khan and the Klingons among many other options. But even as late as December 2010, a finished script still did not exist. Abrams was also unsure whether he would return to direct, although he would later accept the project after completing his 2011 film, Super 8. Uncertainty over Abrams' ultimate involvement led Paramount to push the film back to 2013. A first draft script was finally completed by April 2011. Lindelof said that the team felt it was abundantly necessary that they use Khan in some capacity as, quote, "he has such an intense gravity in the Trek universe, and they likely would have expended more energy by not putting him in the film than the other way around." I don't particularly agree with this logic, but whatever. References to the Wrath of Khan were added to the script, but the team struggled to straddle the line between homage and ripoff. Benicio del Toro had initially been sought as the villain, but later bowed out. Multiple other actors auditioned for the role, but Benedict Cumberbatch was ultimately cast. Alice Eve and Peter Weller were also cast as Carol Marcus and her father Admiral Alexander Marcus, respectively. Marcus had appeared in The Wrath of Khan as the mother of Kirk's son, and Weller had previously appeared as the leader of the xenophobic Terra Prime faction, John Frederick Paxton, in Enterprise. A deleted scene also explained that Carol's parents had separated in the alternate reality, and Carol was raised by her mother in England, the reason Carol has a different accent from her Prime Universe counterpart. The cold open on the planet Nibiru, including the Enterprise rising from the ocean, was conceived to satisfy the need for gigantic imagery they felt was required by the summer blockbuster. The film was once again shot on anamorphic 35mm film, now in addition to IMAX, and later converted in post-production to 3D. Most filming was done in California, with some now done in Iceland as well. Kirk's decision to violate the Prime Directive and save the Nibiran civilization from extinction by a volcano puts Spock's life directly at risk, and Kirk's decision to risk contamination of the Nibiran culture by going back to save Spock lands him in hot water with Starfleet Command. Spock was willing to die for the Prime Directive, and Kirk struggles with the knowledge that had the roles been reversed, Spock would have certainly left Kirk to die. Kirk loses command of the Enterprise to Pike, but Pike pulls some strings to allow Kirk to accompany him as first officer. An emergency meeting at Starfleet headquarters is called after a terrorist bombing of the Starfleet Archive in London, which Khan is behind, although Marcus refers to him with the pseudonym John Harrison. As we learn, following the destruction of Vulcan, Section 31
say, oh, that you only meant well.
had begun secretly exploring distant regions of space in order to assess other possible threats to the Federation. Section 31 discovered the SS Botany Bay. Khan was personally revived by Marcus and recruited under the Harrison alias to design weapons to be used against the Klingons. Section 31's attempts to destabilize the Klingon Empire and the Prime Universe are further explored in Season 2 of Discovery. Khan, having escaped Marcus's grasp, attacks Starfleet headquarters, killing Pike. Khan subsequently flees to Kronos using a portable device derived from Scotty's transwarp beaming equation, which had been appropriated by Starfleet Command. Marcus sanctions Kirk to lead the Enterprise to Kronos with 72 specialized torpedoes on board in an attempt to capture Khan, even authorizing Khan's assassination. The torpedoes are heavily shielded, and Section 31's refusal to let Scotty examine their inner workings leads him to resign his commission in protest. These torpedoes, we find out, contain cryotubes housing Khan's followers, who had escaped with him aboard the Botany Bay, following their exile in the wake of the Eugenics Wars. After Khan surrenders, Dr. McCoy examines one of the people inside the torpedoes, determining them to be over 300 years old. It's unclear whether the Kelvin timeline would have been subject to the temporal changes that resulted in Khan's birth and the Eugenics Wars being delayed from the 20th to 21st century, a major plot point in the Strange New Worlds episode Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. While Into Darkness was made years before this episode, I think it's interesting to consider that there may still be some differences to the Kelvin timeline that precede Nero's arrival. While reference sources like Memory Alpha will insist that the alternate reality diverged in 2233, Simon Pegg has confirmed that the two timelines actually contain differences predating Nero's arrival, its effects having created ripples in time that permeated in both directions. This actually makes more sense than the alternative, in my opinion, given that the Prime Universe timeline is filled with all kinds of time travel paradoxes throughout Earth's history. That said, many of the broad historical events before Nero's arrival would likely be similar in both timelines, including the Xindi and Romulan Wars, as mentioned by Balthazar Edison in Star Trek Beyond. In any event, after learning Khan's true identity, Kirk reluctantly recruits him to help take down Marcus. Marcus arrives in the newly constructed USS Vengeance, built solely for combat, at a secret facility in orbit of Jupiter. Scotty had snuck aboard the Vengeance on a shuttle after Kirk asked him to investigate coordinates offered by Khan. Scotty helps Kirk and Khan infiltrate the Vengeance, making their way to the bridge to save Carol, effectively taken hostage, and stop her father from starting a war. Khan kills Admiral Marcus and assumes control of the Vengeance, but Spock beams over 72 armed photon torpedoes, fooling Khan into thinking they're his followers. McCoy had removed the cryotubes, which now reside safely in sickbay. The torpedoes are detonated, sending the Vengeance spiraling into Earth's atmosphere as Kirk, Scotty, and Carol beam back to the Enterprise. But in order to keep the Enterprise from burning up in the Earth's atmosphere, Kirk must realign the warp core, dying of radiation in a parallel to Spock's death in the Wrath of Khan. Spock apprehends Khan, and Kirk is later revived with augment blood, soon returning to command. Khan is put back in stasis along with his followers, their fates beyond this point indeterminate. Into Darkness had a lower grossing opening weekend than its predecessor, but in subsequent weeks it outgrossed Star Trek internationally and ultimately earned nearly $500 million, becoming the highest grossing film in the franchise. However, while Paramount was pleased with Into Darkness's performance, the slightly underwhelming opening weekend was blamed on Paramount's controversial marketing decisions. While Star Trek Beyond is often the Trek film more commonly associated with bad marketing, a lot of fans have forgotten Paramount's somewhat bizarre decision to conceal Khan's identity in the lead up to Into Darkness's release, emphasizing Benedict Cumberbatch's role as John Harrison. The idea was that by withholding basic plot elements, audiences would be enticed to see the film and enjoy a stunning plot twist. But the campaign ultimately had the opposite effect, making fans and general moviegoers less excited about the sequel than they were years prior. Ironically, I actually had Into Darkness's ending spoiled for me on Reddit, but I digress. I also can't talk about Into Darkness without addressing the casting of Cumberbatch, an Englishman, as Khan Noonien Singh, who in the series is explicitly of Indian descent. George Takei and Star Trek Voyager actor Garrett Wang expressed disappointment at the casting, as did a number of other fans in American Six. Just as with the criticisms of the previous film's lack of political allegory, I do think it is fair to be sensitive to these discussions, but ultimately, it comes down to the performance. Ricardo Montalban is legendary as Khan, and while it's hard to imagine anyone surpassing that, Cumberbatch's performance is also praiseworthy in Into Darkness. Orsi has also stated that the filmmakers felt uncomfortable casting a person of color in the role due to the film's themes regarding terrorism and allegories about US foreign policy. A non-canon tie-in comic explains Khan's appearance was surgically altered by Section 31, though I find discussing such nitty-gritty details as unnecessary as worrying about the Klingon's forehead ridges. Into Darkness was also criticized for a scene featuring Carol Marcus in her underwear, which was called gratuitous and wholly unnecessary, although it's important to note that Eve has said she didn't know the scene would cause such a stir and didn't feel exploited. In fact, I think that much like the other Kelvin Timeline films, Into Darkness is pretty underappreciated by the fan base. Khan's inclusion as the villain and the other references to the Wrath of Khan definitely come off as forced, but the other conflict central to the film, Admiral Marcus's weaponized cynicism, is still compelling. His vision of a more militarized Starfleet in the wake of Vulcan's destruction is entirely reflective of the kinds of pressures that would be felt in a society like the Federation, which has always acted as a sort of stand-in for the United States. Indeed, it's the post-9/11 War on Terror zeitgeist and America's failed foreign policy choices that influenced the writing of the script. How we respond to terrorism and how we navigate seeking revenge versus maintaining our principles is a theme perfectly at home in a franchise like Star Trek and a film in the 21st century. More specifically, Pegg drew parallels between Marcus's attempts to throw Khan under the bus and start a new war with the Klingons with George W. Bush's invasion of Iraq after 9/11. The New Yorker also compared the debate over whether to execute or arrest Khan with targeted killing, an issue that caused many to lose faith in the Obama administration. In this way, Into Darkness actually kind of delivers on one of the elements that was arguably lacking in the 2009 movie, which was purposefully laced with an optimistic flair that nonetheless did fail to impress lots of old school Trekkies. This is in spite of Into Darkness being even less highly regarded by these fans, which to me indicates that a lot of the Kelvin Timeline film's harshest critics are kind of inconsistent in their analyses. And as others have pointed out, the way Into Darkness treats Section 31 as the unequivocal bad guys is incredibly refreshing following the disastrous release of the new Section 31 film starring Michelle Yeoh, whose plot is tantamount to state propaganda. I talk more about the mind-boggling filmmaking decisions behind Section 31 in its own video, which you should definitely check out if you haven't already. So don't get me wrong, Into Darkness does have issues. Indeed, in a 2015 interview with BuzzFeed, Abrams took responsibility for the film's perceived shortcomings, feeling the dynamic of Kirk and Spock's relationship was unclear, and the script wasn't as cohesive as it could have been. But in comparison to some other entries in the franchise, both ones that came before and ones that came after, I don't think Into Darkness is terrible, just weaker. That said, the filmmakers would have one more chance to settle on a working formula for the reboot trilogy with Star Trek Beyond. In order to focus on directing The Force Awakens, J.J. Abrams chose only to return as a producer on the third Reboot trilogy film rather than director. Orsi was announced as director in May 2014, though he was also confirmed to only be producing it that December. Other directors such as Edgar Wright and Duncan Jones were considered before Paramount hired Justin Lin. While Orsi had been working on the script, in January 2015, Pegg and Doug Jung were hired to rewrite it. Alice Eve was not included in the new script despite her character having joined the crew at the end of Into Darkness, as Pegg could not find anything meaningful for her to do. Idris Elba was cast as the villain, with Sofia Boutella cast as the alien character Jayla. Leonard Nimoy does not appear in the film, having passed away in 2015, although the film is dedicated to him as well as Yelchin, who tragically died in a car accident shortly before Beyond was released. Principal photography took place between June and October 2015, primarily in British Columbia. Additional filming locations included the Northwest Territories, Seoul, and Dubai, the latter of which stood in for Starbase Yorktown. The film depicts the Enterprise crew's struggle against Krall, who strands them on the planet Altamide on the edge of Federation space. As it turns out, Krall is in fact Balthazar Edison, former captain of the USS Franklin, the first Earth ship capable of Warp 4, indicating it was launched around the late 2140s, before the launch of the NX-01. Originally an officer of MACO, or Military Assault and Command Operations, Edison served in the Xindi and Romulan Wars before MACO was disbanded following the founding of the Federation in 2161. On a mission in the Gagarin radiation belt, the Franklin vanished, though the crew was ultimately stranded on Altamide, likely having traveled through a wormhole. As no sign of rescue came, Edison concluded the Federation must have abandoned them and sought its destruction, using relics left by Altamide's native species that included ships, a drone workforce, and technology that could extend life. Krall obtains the remaining pieces of a weapon called the Abronath, procured from the Enterprise after it had been rejected as a gift from the Fumbonan Republic to the T-Naxi delegation. Krall plans to attack Yorktown and disperse the weapon into its environmental systems, representing an assault on the Federation at large, before he is defeated by the Enterprise crew. I won't spend a lot of time talking about Star Trek Beyond, not because I think it's bad, but actually because I think it's easily the strongest film in the trilogy, and thus I just don't have that much critical to say about it. While Into Darkness is steeped in political allegory but is ultimately bogged down by its gimmicky references to the Wrath of Khan, Beyond has the added benefit of feeling like a classic TOS adventure on the big screen. The production design is gorgeous, and a planet like Altamide is a perfect location for a story of this caliber. Krall's debate with Uhura about the merits of unity, and his assertion that conflict is necessary, serve as a meta-commentary on the franchise's utopian outlook as a whole, whereas Into Darkness tapped into the War on Terror zeitgeist of the 2000s and early 2010s, Beyond, being a 2016 film, is also poetic as it preceded the latest phase in the political polarization of American culture. But while Beyond definitely respects Star Trek's themes of unity and diversity, it also offers a nuanced critique of the Federation's expansionist nature, which can be summed up in one line of dialogue.
This is where the frontier pushes back.
I often include Beyond alongside Discovery Season 1 and Mariner's character in Lower Decks as thoughtful examples of how Trek does what that Empire article wished the 2009 movie did, which is to subvert the franchise's traditional stance on how the Federation approaches exploration at a time when criticizing our institutions is more important than ever. And Beyond does this while still engaging in the sort of fun adventure storytelling that also forms a core part of what Star Trek is supposed to be. Unfortunately, not enough fans, or general audience members for that matter, have given Beyond a chance, I think. Paramount's questionable decision to include the Beastie Boys song Sabotage in the trailer and emphasize the film's action likely spooked many fans out of seeing it in theaters. I think Justin Lin's involvement also led many to prejudge Beyond, and audiences were understandably apprehensive after having been disappointed with elements of Into Darkness. Another factor that probably doomed Beyond at the box office was its release alongside multiple other summer blockbusters, including Ghostbusters, Jason Bourne, and Suicide Squad. The film ended up grossing $343 million worldwide against a budget of $185 million. Since most studios prefer to see a 2-to-1 return on investment, this was considered a loss. Simon Pegg would later express frustration with the way Paramount marketed the film, blaming it on the studio's belief that the film was too Trekky, which motivated them to emphasize the action. Pegg would later comment, "The fact is, the appeal of Star Trek is slightly more niche than the appeal of, say, the Marvel movies, which make huge amounts of money and have this really, really broad appeal, and they do very well. I think Star Trek is just a little bit more niche, so it isn't going to hit those kinds of numbers. So yes, the obvious thing to do would be to not go for that massive spectacle, go for something a little bit more restrained in the vein of the original series. Yes, that would be a brilliant thing to do, and I'm sure it probably has been discussed. You specialize a little bit more, Maybe TV is a better place for Star Trek now. Television has evolved so much. It's become something which is very much a contemporary, a peer of cinema. It's simply viewed in a different way. It isn't a reduced scope anymore. You can still do masses of interesting things, and it can still look modern and not inexpensive. Maybe television is a better format for Star Trek. That's where it started, you know. Ultimately, Beyond's poor box office performance proved that Paramount could no longer rely solely on the core fan base to make Star Trek profitable on the big screen. As Trek film budgets have ballooned since the 1990s from tens of millions of dollars to hundreds of millions of dollars, they become even more of a financial risk for Paramount. And indeed, the studio has notably been in even bigger financial straits in the 2020s, which is, I think, part of their reason for canceling Discovery, Lower Decks, and Prodigy. Further developments of the film franchise past Beyond have been incredibly sluggish, even the one that actually got released, Section 31. But more adventures in the Kelvin timeline are, in my opinion, highly unlikely, if for no other reason that the actors have gotten too expensive. Chris Pine has gone on to have an illustrious career, including success as Steve Trevor in the DCEU, and Zoe Saldana has starred in 4 of the 7 highest grossing films of all time, including the top 3. A 4th Kelvin film did enter development in 2016, written by the duo behind The Lord of the Rings of Power, and would have reportedly featured Hemsworth returning as George Kirk, but Paramount's inability to meet Pine and Hemsworth's salary demands contributed to the project being shelved in 2019. Quentin Tarantino has also floated directing an R-rated Star Trek film, though this hasn't come to fruition either. Another attempt at a Beyond sequel, helmed by Noah Hawley, was close to production in 2020, but was placed on hold by new Paramount president Emma Watts. Watts set Discovery writer Kalinda Vasquez to write a script for an original film, and a separate script was developed by the co-writer of Captain Marvel. Paramount set a 2023 release date and announced the return of the reboot cast, but none of the actors had entered negotiations for their return. The new director attached to the project, WandaVision director Matt Shakman, left to direct the next Fantastic Four movie for Marvel Studios, and the film was removed from Paramount's release schedule. A new slate of films was announced in early 2024, including the final chapter of the main film series, and a prequel that would explore the period following First Contact, set for a 2026 release? While I think this latest slew of projects might have a higher chance of actually getting produced, to be honest, y'all, I'll believe it when I see a trailer. So, where do I think the Kelvin Timeline Trilogy stacks up compared to the rest of the franchise? Well, like I've said, I think all 3 films are actually better than some other entries. It's certainly hard to do worse than Section 31 or Final Frontier, but I also think the Kelvin Trilogy is unquestionably more entertaining than its 2 immediate predecessors, Insurrection and Nemesis. I'd say it probably also tackles more interesting questions than the other 2 Next Generation films that I actually like, Generations and First Contact, although Into Darkness's gimmickiness means those films edge it out on originality. I've also mentioned before how I find the motion picture to be too glacially paced for my sensibilities, and while The Search for Spock is good, it's hardly spectacular. But while Beyond is probably the franchise's best movie since The Undiscovered Country, it's hard to beat The Wrath of Khan or my personal favorite, The Voyage Home. That said, all in all, I'd agree that Trek succeeds better in the television format, which affords it more time to ponder philosophical questions and develop character relationships. It's hard to compare any of the movies to any of the television series, so I won't even try. But the Kelvin Timeline movies have had a profound impact on Star Trek canon. They preceded Kurtzman's takeover as executive producer of the contemporary Star Trek streaming shows, which, in my opinion, has had positive and negative outcomes, as I think the individual shows all have strengths and weaknesses, but are overall more aimless compared to Legacy Trek. In terms of lore, the series with the most direct connection to the Kelvin movies is probably Picard, which follows up on the aftermath of the destruction of Romulus Romulus, an event that has had major political ramifications on local space. As of the writing and recording of this video, I haven't covered Picard yet in my retrospective series, but if you're watching this a little further in the future, you may be able to watch it right now. And I've also made retrospectives on every other Star Trek series and film besides Strange New Worlds, the only Trek show that's still airing as I'm writing this. All these videos are collected in a playlist, which you can access on my channel page. With that, thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a thumbs up down below and don't forget to share it. That stuff really helps me out. If you haven't subscribed yet, be sure to do that as well so you won't miss future uploads, and click the bell icon to receive all notifications. If you want to support my work even further, you can become a patron at patreon.com/OrangeRiver, link in the description, or become a YouTube member by clicking the join button on my channel page. I just want to give a quick shout out to all of my donors who allow me to bring on talent like editors to make more high quality content for you to enjoy. By becoming a patron or member, you also get access to awesome perks like behind the scenes photos and videos, patron member only polls, name in the credits, merch discounts, and more. Or you can drop a one-time super thanks or PayPal donation. All are appreciated. Links to my PayPal as well as my social media and merch store are in the description too. That's all I have for this week. Live long and prosper.
Hey you! Yes, you! Sitting there on your ass! It's me, the ghost of Dr. Asukaza, coming back from reptilian hell to deliver you another very important message. The reason why I died is because that asshole killed me in the first issue. Like seriously? You impaled me? But whatever. Put down your replica of the Enterprise and listen up! Issue 3 of Star Trek Endurance is now available for patrons and members of OrangeRiver. Just sign up for $2 or more at patreon.com/OrangeRiver or click the join button on OrangeRiver's YouTube channel page. If Erica could figure it out, you can too. By the way, a lot of people seem to think I'm a Gorn. Well, I'm not a fucking Gorn, I'm a Nihilist, you assholes. Look it up. We were in the animated series. It's canon. Anyway, back to reptilian hell.
Do you like merchandise? If so, head on over to the new and improved OrangeRiver merch store. That's right, OrangeRiver is now officially on Spreadshop. I've got a bunch of awesome new designs, including All the Way Down,
All the way.
Vape God, Tally, aka Best Girl,
It was totally worth it.
and what is perhaps my greatest design yet,
I love being married to my husband.
Plus, I've got some of my classic designs like OrangeRiver Arrowhead, N7, Metroid, Mycelial Network,
The Mycelial Network is like
Mycelial Network, and more. And there are even some new products like OrangeRiver hats. That's right, OrangeRiver hats now exist. Visit the link in the description to get discounts and other special deals on items from my store.